Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
So, for this session we will get into the biases of the new media, but again before we go into that, let me tell you our approach to the course has been, if you recall, we started with discussing what is new in new media. We started about pointing to the new characteristics of the new media. So, in sync with the trajectory of the discussion, before we get into the bias of new media, we will try to point to the bias of the old media, so to say, and we will try to demonstrate how the new media is no different. So, if in the first half of the discussions, in the first half of the course, we have sought to understand how new is the new media, what is new in the new media, maybe in these sessions, in the forthcoming sessions, we are looking into how the new media is no different from the old media. So, we are again, like if you look into the trajectory of the course, so it is revolving around the concept of newness, so to say. So, we will get into in this session the nature of bias in media in general, and from there we will mount our discussion to how some of these biases also seep through the new media. So, for this we will invoke the Marxist, like if you now recall the Marxist staple of the base superstructure, the dyadic relation between the base and superstructure from the last session. So, we will first look into that base superstructure model, and we will discuss this model. And let me tell you, this model was very instrumental in understanding how the 19th and 20th century media was usually understood. So, this modular approach, this model could explain how the 19th and 20th century model, the 19th and 20th century media would function. But again, when I get into new media, my point is to show that the base superstructure model as a theoretic approach is inadequate, if not totally irrelevant, in the context of our discussion on new media. But having said that, I will also remind you that new media also come with some ideological bias, ideological content, ideological disposition, political intent. However, the ideological bias of the new media cannot be explained with the base superstructure model, which was workable, which was very instrumental, which was very instructive in understanding the older forms of media. So, this is roughly speaking this session all about. So, let us start with the base superstructure model. So, in the classical Marxist theory, ideology, very broadly speaking, has got to do with certain social norms. Ideology is a set of social norms which appear as natural, but they are culturally justified, they are culturally validated, and there are cultural premise, there is a cultural justifications to it. So, ideology is a set of ideological, social, cultural constructs that are made to appear natural. So, in other words, what I am trying to suggest is there is no such legal validity to ideology as such, but ideology is normative in the sense that we abide by it, we adhere to certain ideological dispositions because they appear natural to us. But what appears natural to us, one has also to remember in this context, are socially constructed. Certain ideology are constructed in certain way with certain political intent. Now, if we quickly go back to our fairness cream example, like the fairness cream example, as I said, the fairness cream advertisements come with ideological dispositions that has got to do with certain ideas of femininity and the belief and the superstition, so to say, that has got to do with the like the superstition that females ought to be fair. So, this is ideological disposition. So, in other words, this is a social construct. There are gender norms, there are racist undertones to it that makes you believe that females are ought to be fair. So, this is an ideological intent which has naturalized, which has been socially and culturally legitimized and naturalized to us to such a extent that when we see a fairness cream advertisement, we do not necessarily question the ideological bias that informs this kind of an advertisement. So, this like the reason that the fairness cream, the feminine fairness cream, so to say, sells is because that the clients or buyers assimilate or reappropriated the ideological dispositions. They buy into this ideology which has been made natural, which has been made to appear natural by the fairness cream manufacturer or the broadcaster who is showing broadcasting such advertisement. So, this roughly speaking is ideology. So, to recap, ideology is nonetheless socially constructed, but once we encounter ideology, it takes off the seam of social construction. It does not appear apparently when we encounter certain ideological disposition. It does not come to us as it were socially constructed. We tend to assume them as naturalized, as the norm. So, going by the classical Marxist theory, ideology falls within the superstructure. So, let me So, in the classical Marxist imagination, like this dyad of the base and superstructure, like explained through, I will quickly explain that. Like the superstructure in this Marxist imagination, ideology falls within the domain of the superstructure. Like one may imagine the base superstructure model like in relation to the architectural pattern of a building. The base so one like think about the base in terms of like the base of a building, base of the foundation of a architectural piece. For example, the base, the foundation of a building determines its structure, the structure of the building, the roof, the ceiling, the walls, the bricks, and so on. So, this is founded upon the base of the building, which is the concrete, the pillars, and the foundation that goes underneath the soil, and so on and so forth. So, one could think about this Marxist model in analogy to the architectural pattern of a building. So, in the Marxist imagination, the base is the means of production, as in the technological infrastructure which is needed to the technological infrastructure needed, which the bourgeoisie owns. I think we have mentioned this before. This has got to do with the technological infrastructure that has got to do with generating certain ideological discourse. And if you think in the context of the media infrastructure with which one generates media content, the broadcaster generates media content. So, this is in short the base. The superstructure, on the other hand, is determined by the base, inasmuch as the pillar or the foundation determines the look, the structure of a building. The base reflects on the superstructure, which has got to do with education, family, religion, politics, and so on and so forth. So, these are the family, religion, one's religious affiliation, one's political affiliations, one education, and so on and so forth. These are reflected on by the base, the technology, the means of production. So, this is a typically Marxist understanding. In this Marxist imagination, ideology would fit in here. Ideology would fit in within the domain of the superstructure. So, the Marxists would say that the ideology is impacted by the base, as in so, I think it is very important to understand the loop, the circuit here. So, according to the Marxists, the base so this is a very important concept to understand here. The base determines the superstructure, the kind of technology you have, the kind of control that the broadcaster happens to exercise on the means of production, and we have been reiterating this for a while, would determine the kind of superstructural reflections, the kind of ideological the kind of ideological discourses that come with certain media content. So, it determines the superstructure. On the other hand, the ideological intent and the superstructure legitimizes the base. So, like this circuit, in other words, is what we call is deterministic. So, this Marxist model is deterministic in the sense that in the Marxist imagination, it is the base that always determines the superstructure, not the other way around. The superstructure, if you remember, it legitimizes the base, but the base determines the superstructure. So, although it is a loop, it is a circuit, you have to understand this distinction here, like one is legitimization and the other is determination. But now, the problem with media here is where exactly do you place media in the dyadic scheme here. Like the principal difficulty in drawing an analogy onto media from this model or for that matter placing media within these two categories, the base and superstructure, is the fact that media involves both technology and ideology, as we have demonstrated for the last few sessions through our a diverse range of examples. This is what we are trying to stress on. The media is not just means of production, it does not involve technology alone, it involves ideology as well as technology. So, this is the principal difficulty in drawing in deploying this model to understand the media. Because media involves both, in Stuart Hall's words, it involves both encoding and decoding. I will give you a more concrete example to understand the problem here. Think of cinema, for example. The making of a movie, for example, involves technique, the technology, the technological know-how to make a movie, for example, the post production of movie making, the sound sync, the editing, the camera, and so on and so forth. The technologies of exhibiting the movie, like the sound, like whether it is a Dolby sound, whether it is a like a non-Dolby sound, is a Inox projection and so on. So, do you watch the movie on projector, do you watch the movie on your laptop. So, these are exhibitory aspects of the movie. So, these comprise the base. So, these are the technological aspect of cinema. Again, if you look into the content, for example, of the movie, content of a movie, the theme, the plot, the genre, the story of the movie, its treatment, the treatment of the movie. For example, the villain, the character of the villain in a Bollywood romantic comedy is not portrayed in the same way as the villain is portrayed in a crime thriller, for example. So, these are two different kind of portrayals of the same character. So, there are certain subjectivities that are reflected in certain genres, certain forms of representation. So, this is what I call the treatment of the movie. Think, for example, movie going habit of the audience, like who do I go with to watch a movie, do I go to the theater, do I go to the theater to watch a movie, do I watch it on laptop, do I go it with friends or family, or do I simply download it on my computer. So, this is like the movie going habit, the movie going traffic. Think, for example, the circulation distribution network of a movie. So, why are certain movies shown in certain theaters show certain movie, certain theaters do not show certain movies, and if you in today's context think of online platforms like Netflix or Amazon Prime, there are certain movies that come and pop up on the Amazon Prime, certain movies do not, certain movies pop up on Amazon Prime immediately after release. For certain movies we have to wait very long till they come up on these online networks. So, why do certain movies like so why does the cable or the satellite TV screen certain movies time and again, while we never get to see certain movies? Why are adult movies, for example, only shown at night? So, these are problems you have to think through in order to understand that these are the ideological aspect of cinema. So, as I have demonstrated, the cinema involves both ideology and technology. So, on the one hand, I do not mind watching any movie on my laptop, like if it is a random movie, I do not mind watching it on my laptop, but imagine if it is a 3D or a 7D movie, you do not get that feel watching it on your laptop. So, you have to go to the theater to watch a 3D or a 7D movie. So, here if you have a classic example where the technology of the movie, which is to say the 3D or the 7D effects, the technology determines the ideology of how you would watch the movie. On the other hand, if you think, for example, with the emergence of the online streaming platforms and the pay-per-view schemes, these online platforms like Netflix or Amazon Prime, they continuously track our movie watching habits, and which is why like there are certain content that like they suggest, and there are certain content that are generated because of our individualized customized movie watching patterns, movie watching traffic. So, this is again example of ideology impacting technology. So, in other words, technology and ideology, now if you recall the base superstructure model here, according to the Marxist model, like the base always impacts ideology, technology always impacts ideology. If you look into this diagram here, as we said, this model is deterministic in the sense that in the Marxist imagination, the base always determines the superstructure. What we have established so far with the example of with the case study of cinema is that the superstructure, as in the ideology, can also determine the base. In other words, technology affects ideology in as much as ideology impacts technology. The newer and more nuanced form of media, as our illustrations point to, rendered the division between base and superstructure, and more importantly the nature of determinism, by which I mean this unidirectional presupposition that the base always impacts the superstructure, not the other way around. The superstructure rather legitimizes the base. So, this is a unidirectional approach, this is a unidirectional supposition, which is what we have called the deterministic aspect of the Marxist model. So, what our examples point to is that this determinism, the nature of determinism, is kind of amorphous. It's kind of rendered blurred with the example that we just gave. So, it's not as deterministic as the Marxist model point to. So, in other words, technology and ideology is indeed related in terms of a loop, in terms of a circuitry, but it is not the case that the base always determines the superstructure. The superstructure can also determine the base, which is to say the ideology can sometimes also determine technology, determine means of production. This is, I would highlight here, is one very important characteristic of the new media, which is like shifting away from the Marxist approach that the base superstructure model has illustrated. It is a shift away from the base superstructure model, with which scholars would often, media scholars would often be able to explain the 19th 20th century media, 20th century media could be explained by the base superstructure model. The new media, on the other hand, and this is I highlight, is one of the very important characteristic of new media, is a shift away from the kind of a very dyadic understanding of ideology, technology or base superstructure. The question therefore is, what we can infer from here is, as we have seen, like the question therefore is, what is then the relation between technology and ideology? Like how do we then reconcile this, what we have seen, like the circuit that we have talked about, can this, like as in the relation, can it be reconciled with the base superstructure model in any form? Is it then, like as we have said, like it is not deterministic, or these, then if it is not deterministic in the sense that it is related in a circuitry, then what exactly is the nuance that determines one another, and how do we make sense of the nature of the determination, if there is any. So, this comprises the central problematic of our quest to understand the characteristic of new media. So, the birth of the printing press, for example, if you could think of the history of the printing press, could not have been made possible without the availability of the technique of block printing on the other hand. So, unless you have the technique for block printing, you cannot have the printing press. If you look into the history of the printing press and the block printing and the letter press before the arrival of digitalization and all of that. So, this has got to do with the technique of block printing as a prerequisite on the one hand, and on the other hand it was got to do with the large scale scriptural proliferation following the Protestant Reformation, by which if you look into the history of English Reformation, like there was a huge demand for Bible being translated, and with the Lutheran Reformation and all of that, there was this concept of personalization of religion, where these textbooks, not textbooks, like the religious texts and religious scriptures, there was a very popular mass demand to translate this, because the whole idea of religion was being divorced from the authoritative discourse of the church, and it was privatized and personalized to a great extent. So, if you look into, for example, this birth of the printing press, this gives you a classic example, like the printing press has got to do with the emergence of the technique of block printing, which is purely in the domain of technology, whereas the birth of the printing press has also got to do with the ideological disposition of the English Reformation, which has got to do with personalization of religion. So, if you look into the printing press as an example of media, so it traverses both worlds, like technology and ideology, the base and superstructure at the same time. So, this is the problem I am trying to hint at. So, it is very difficult, for example, to put where would you, in the schema of the diagram that I have here, the base superstructure model, where would one put where would printing press, for example, fit into, like is it superstructure, is it ideology? So, we cannot determine. So, this is one problem that I want to flag post. So, let us take another example here, like the e-reader, for example, the Kindle Kobo or the Amazon Kindle that we have. Take these examples, like these are devices, these are technological devices. So, one can argue that the change in people's reading habit of late, that is the social condition of change, like people do not prefer, like it is a very oft lamented discourse that people often say that people do not like to read these days, and there is a change in reading habit, like we read most of our stuff on our mobile phones or other handheld electronic gadgets and so on and so forth. So, reading a paper book as a practice is increasingly being obsolete. So, it is increasingly becoming obsolete. So, one can argue that this change in people's reading habit is that is the social condition of the change has led to the discovery of these reading devices, which is to say the e-reader. Contrariwise, one might also argue that one might discount the role of the social. One can also argue that the availability, accessibility and the impact of the technological apparatuses necessary for the discovery of the e-reader eventually led to the discovery. Like we needed certain chips, certain transistors, for example, like there are certain chips that go into that device. The device comprises other smaller device, other minute technological subsets, that there is a screen involved, there are certain chips involved, there are certain buttons, there are certain imagine for example, the materiality, the materials involved in making the device. So, one can say like these are the prerequisites for the discovery of the device. So, these are two line of arguments. So, in other, let me recap here. So, one can say that it is because of the social change of the phenomenon of how people read, the ideological disposition that has got to do with people's reading habit that led to the discovery. That is one way of going about it. The other way of seeing this phenomena is there were certain technological apparatuses, there were certain technological devices as prerequisites which were already accessible to us, that made us integrate those smaller subsets into a device which is the e-reader. So, that is the technological line of argument. So, based on these, like from this, the reason I am highlighting this two way of argumentation is because that I want to come to this dichotomous relation between the idea of technological determinism versus social determinism. So, based on the position one takes in terms of the argumentation, the two patterns of argumentation that I mentioned, one can either be a technological determinist who subscribes to the belief that a society's technology drives the development of its social structure, which is more akin to the Marxist understanding, like the base determining the superstructure, technology determining the ideology. So, like it is that is, so now you get the etymology also here, like technological determinist. So, one who believes that technology determines the ideology is a techno determinist, who believes that a society's technology drives the developments of its social structure, cultural values, ideological dispositions, etc. Or one could be a cultural or a social determinist who prioritizes the primacy of the social, the political, the cultural, the ideological, so to say, and believes that is the ideology that drives certain technological innovations or the discovery, the way certain technology, certain technological infrastructures function. So, it is because of our disposition to mold and use certain technologies in certain way that the technologies exist. So, it has got to do with the primacy of the social and cultural rather than the autonomous influence, autonomous, or even for that matter a very exclusivist deterministic understanding of the medium or the technology. So, this is two strands of argumentation. Number one, so these are the two strands, as I say, like technological determinism, which is in short we call like techno determinism, and the social and cultural determinism.